But, where do you see your space moving forward? Not only Strategen, but, low carbon emissions. What do you see over the next 5 to 10 years for those that are watching this podcast and are asking themselves, is this a space I want to get into, or I think it's going to do this? And they kind of like to compare it against which you see, recognizing, you're in a pole position. What do you think?
That's a great question. And I think, obviously, like all industries, there will be an impact on the energy sector due to COVID. I think in the long term, and even in the medium term, though, the transition in the energy ecosystem right now from these conventional, carbon-based technologies to zero carbon technologies, solar, wind, energy storage, batteries on the grid, electric vehicles, green hydrogen is another one that's really coming into the forefront of the conversation right now. Mm-hmm. The economics have shifted fundamentally there, and the transition is going to continue happening at a very, very rapid pace, regardless of the macroeconomic situation that's happening in the world around us. Okay. We're just too far along in the transition for it to stop at this point. So I see plenty of opportunity within the energy industry for careers in clean tech and all these new technologies. Just like how so many other industries have been disrupted by new technology over the past 20, 30 years, that transition is in full swing right now in the energy system. I think the energy system was lagging many other sectors up until probably the past 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And the time for that transition is now.
Welcome to the Intergenius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
Welcome back to another episode of the Intergenius Podcast, and I'm excited today to welcome my guest, Mark Higgins. Mark, thank you for being on today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And so Mark is the COO of Strategen, and in full disclosure, Mark and I go back a long ways, back to the FRV days, where we would meet in San Francisco and talk about developing utility-scale solar projects. But Mark has done so much more since that time, and when I put this podcast together, I knew I wanted Mark on the show, so I'm really excited to have you on finally to be with us, to share your wit and wisdom with the audience. So, let's start from the top, Mark. Let's talk a little bit about your background, man. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think the best way to describe my background and my path in life is a meandering one. I was born near Chicago, and I grew up in Oklahoma City, and I went to Notre Dame for my undergrad, where I got a degree in government, of all things. However, I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go in when I got done with school, or even while I was in school. Certainly while I was in school, I thought for a while maybe I wanted to go into the Foreign Service. I was very interested in business and venture capital and technology, and climate change is a big issue for me. But I was also really into other areas like biotech and agricultural technologies and other things like that. So when I got done with my undergrad, I did a stint at Deloitte in Chicago for a couple of years, and then I always really intended to go back to grad school pretty quickly after my undergrad. And I moved out to California and did an international affairs program at the University of California, San Diego campus. Mm-hmm. And while I was at UC San Diego, I actually thought for a while I was going to be in the Foreign Service. And I got an internship at the U.S. Consulate in Auckland, New Zealand, which, interestingly enough, kind of started me down on the career path that resulted in where I'm at right now, in a very meandering way. While I was working there, I met a gentleman in San Diego who was the honorary consul from New Zealand in San Diego, and he was in the process of starting up a venture capital fund focused on bringing really interesting technologies from Australia and New Zealand into the U.S. And we were primarily focused on biotech and agricultural technologies at the time. And I had an opportunity while I was there to get some exposure to things like biofuels, biomass power, digestion technologies, all sorts of the kind of clean tech technologies that were really in the discussion in kind of the mid-2000 timeframe. This was before solar and wind were very cost effective, especially for utility scale generation. And when I moved up to the Bay Area, I got a job with a little firm called MMA Renewable Ventures that was just starting to do work in utility scale renewables. And I almost described it as private equity at the time because we had kind of a pool of cash and we were looking to go buy assets and develop projects. And so some of my first projects in the renewable space had nothing to do with solar or wind or anything that that kind of form the common technology you hear about today. It was more about, we're doing a lot of work on biodiesel. We were doing work on biomass digestion technologies. We were doing work on biomass power plants. And I actually, we ended up buying a few power plants that we were trying to retrofit into biomass power plants. And then we got bought by Photowattio. Photowattio's focus was more on utility scale solar. So I started to transition to doing development work in the solar space and ended up basically with Joe's help, develop quite a large portfolio of utility scale solar projects that really formed the core assets that Photowattio had in California. And we eventually got bought by SunEdison. I ended up being director of utility scale power project development for SunEdison here in California. And eventually I went to work for a utility here in California where I did a lot of work on new technology, generator interconnection, a lot of the transmission planning work that went into bringing all of the renewables on the grid. I was involved in a lot of PG&E's early work on energy storage strategy. I helped kind of formulate some of the early work there, and always been really, really passionate about new technology and new technology that's clean tech. Honestly, cleaning the grid, the mission-driven side of things is what really has made me passionate about the energy space. I've always wanted to work on the on the clean energy technologies rather than the more conventional technologies. And so I was, like that when I was at PG&E. Got introduced to Janice Lynn, the CEO of Strategen, while I was at PG&E. And Strategen also runs a trade association here in California focused on energy storage. It's called the California Energy Storage Alliance. Just really, really loved what the firm was doing. Thought I could bring my kind of entrepreneurial drive and policy background and development experience to the firm to help grow the firm. And when I joined, we were pretty small still. We were about 6 people. And over the past 6 years, since I've been at the firm, we've overseen growing into a bunch of new trade associations. We've grown from being a fairly California-focused firm to being an international firm now. We've got about 30 people around the world with the firm right now. We've got an Australian office that's growing really fast. We're doing work on electric vehicle integration. Green hydrogen is a big area for the firm right now. And, if you look across the 50 states, just about every state that's had innovative regulatory work being done or new technology implementation, we've been fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of that, from the New York Rev to some of the amazing work that Hawaii is doing on decarbonization, great work going on in Arizona, great work in the Southeast even on a lot of these things. And, been fortunate to be in at a firm that has had a lot of opportunity to really punch above our weight in the space. And it's been fun to watch us grow and fun to be involved in that. So just a little bit about me, and it's been a meandering path. I mean, I'm the chief operating officer of this firm now, and have been for most of the time that I've been here. But I think how I got to be a chief operating officer, that's kind of a jack of all trades type of role. And I couldn't be a jack of all trades had I not had such a meandering path. If I'd focused on one thing, I would be an expert in just that. And I would have grown in my career, absolutely. But I don't know if I would have had this diverse background that has actually made it pretty easy for me to switch from one thing to the next in what I'm doing, in the way that a COO has to do.
Yeah. I love how you share that meandering path. You know, we talked about that a couple of days ago, and how, you know, embracing the journey, right? Where is it going to take you, and kind of not knowing it, and being too hyper focused on an end goal, you sort of miss the scenery. You know, it's kind of like you know, even on a trip, so to speak, it's like you're so focused on the destination, you lose the beauty and the depth and the tapestry that's woven on the path to get there. And I like where you went with that, because I think a lot of people need to hear that message today. I think it's certainly a lot of the younger generation as well, that if you're too hyper focused, you miss out. I mean, here you are coming out of school, you know, you're trying a couple of different things, you kind of link up, and you sort of find your way. And then the diversity you've had in your career has allowed you to sit where you are today and make, you know, really good, well-informed decisions on a daily basis, driving this company forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, career paths are just by their nature meandering. I use that word a lot because, you know, it's true. I don't think it's very easy, especially with the way the world is today, for many people to be able to say, you know, especially when they're in their 20s or, you know, still in school, this is where I want to end up, and here are all of the steps that I need to take to get there. Careers don't work like that. So I think, you know, my advice in that respect, and my kind of observations are, you know, whatever you're doing at any point in time, find the aspects of your job that you really love to do and do that really well. You get really good at that. And that's going to be how you find what's next for you. Not so much, trying to map that out, like, you know, 50 years into the future, go backwards in time and say, this is what I need to do at, you know, in every year along the way to get there. I definitely think that there are many ways to get to wherever you want to go, and you may end up going in a completely different direction than you thought, and you end up loving it and realize that that's my passion, and I'm glad I ended up where I'm at.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. You know, I mean, you kind of dovetailed into the next question I've got, really, which is, you know, when you look at the skill set that's required for kind of what you do, you're talking about doing what you're really good at. What do you think your strengths are? I mean, you know, being the COO of this, you know, I mean, really boutique consulting firm, you're driving the strategy forward every day. What do you think are the top strengths that you have and are really necessary for the role you're in?
I think probably my top strength is that I have a very short attention span. I think with my job, I have to be able to, from 1 minute to the next, like, split between things that are just completely unrelated.
Right.
And I think that my brain just happens to be wired in a way that I actually thrive in that kind of an environment.
Right.
So, you know, it's nice when I can actually focus on something for an extended period of time, but that's not my normal day. You know, my normal day is I'm dealing with like an HR issue, and then I have to write a contract, and then I have to, you know, think about strategy for, you know, a potential project in Latin America, and then I have to, you know, have a conversation with a member of one of our trade associations, and, you know, so it's so diverse what I'm doing from moment to moment and from day to day, that probably my superpower is my lack of an attention span, or rather, you know, I'm being a bit flippant, but it's my ability to jump from one thing to the next seamlessly. I think that makes me effective at the unique job that I have.
Right. Well, being able to pivot quickly is important, you know, especially in today's economy, you know, today's world. I mean, the velocity with which information moves is so quick, as you know, and there's so many ways we're all connected that, you know, keeping up with that is really tricky. So finding that balance, I think, is tough, right? I mean, enough time that it's thorough, but then not too much time where you're, you know, obviously neglecting something else. So let me roll into another question that I like to ask. You kind of touched on it a little bit too, is walk us through a day in the life of Mark Higgins. What's it like for you? And as a part of that question, I'd like you to answer, whether you're on the road, whether you're at home, what's that one part of your day that's just non-negotiable? Personal, professional, what's that part of your day, or that's something you do in your day, you got to have in your day, that's always going to be there as a part of a typical day for you?
Well, coffee and exercise. Those are probably my two non-negotiable things. If I don't start my day off with a good cup of coffee, and I don't get some exercise during the day, I'm
Yeah.
not as productive as I otherwise be.
Sure.
And so, usually I try and get up pretty early
Okay.
every day and squeeze in, either today it's a workout video. It used to be going to the gym. During COVID, it's a workout video, or going for a bike ride, or going for a run, or something like that.
Sure.
But
Sure.
that's important to me, and it sets the tone of my day. When I do that, I feel a lot more energetic, a lot more productive, and I'm happier too.
Okay.
Usually I start my day by kind of reviewing my calendar for the day and figuring out what I need to prep for. Most of my day is filled with meetings. So usually I just try and allocate enough time, enough blocks of free time during the day so that I can actually prepare for various meetings that I have. Okay. And there's not a lot of, I would say, regularity to my day beyond the fact that usually greater than 50% of it is meetings. Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, a lot of meetings on a regular basis. And you start the day with your exercise. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the kickstart, not later in the day, not in the evening time.
Yeah. I tend not to do exercise in the evening so much. And, that's actually been an interesting, kind of evolution for me. I used to not be a morning person at all, and I always wanted to work out in the evenings. But as I've gotten a little older, I've found that by doing it in the morning, I just feel a lot more energized and I'm more productive. Sure. And frankly, I just wake up early anyways now. I used to like to sleep in more.
Got to prime the day, as they say. Yeah.
That's what happens when you get gray hairs in the beard.
No, I know. Well, it does evolve and change, and you got to kind of roll with the punches, as they say. Talk to me a little bit about, just on the professional side, are there any tools that you use on a regular basis that you feel have really helped you, maintain efficiency and be really productive in what you do, whether it's an app, a piece of software, and anything else or maybe more than one thing that you lean on and like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think a couple of observations I have on that front. Uh-huh. One, I'm still a notebook guy. I always keep a notebook by my side, taking notes and jotting down my tasks. I've tried using different computer programs or planners in the system to, on my phone or on the computer to keep track of what I need to do. And I just tend to want to go back to using a notebook, and that's just who I am. It's not really something that works for everybody, but it works for me. I try, and there's a couple of networks and things like that I use that I find to be really helpful. We, as a company, we use a resource management tool to help oversee all of the work that all of our different teams are working on, all the different projects they're doing. How do we allocate people to those projects? Who's free, who's not, and to do all of the budgeting and proposal development work that we need to do to be successful as a firm. So definitely there is software and tools that go into making us successful as a firm. Personally, and I've been the driving force behind us implementing a lot of those tools that we're using today as a firm. But, personally for my own organization, I use just really standard things like Outlook. I use a notebook to keep track of things. I've tried in this era that we're in right now, where we've been in shelter in place and everybody's working virtually, to make use of more of the collaboration platforms that are out there. We use Microsoft Teams a lot. We use Zoom a lot. A lot of people have used things like Slack as well, and that's very similar to Microsoft Teams, and that's a great way for us to communicate. The other thing that I try and do with my team, and really everybody in our company, that is a big change since we've been kind of on lockdown mode for such a long time, is being on video chats. It used to be just, we had a lot of people that work remotely prior to this going on, and nobody would ever turn their screen on. Yeah. And I think we all need that human connection. And I think one of the best things that's come out of a lot of this is that we all want to show our faces now in meetings and to talk with people and actually see their reaction. And it brings you closer even when we're far away, or even when we can't be in the same room together.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, well, obviously the uptick in the video conferencing is kind of off the charts, right? But to have that content, I think is so important. It's very human. I mean, it's kind of hardwired in us. So I'm enjoying that aspect of some of the changes that have been made to date. So
Me too.
I appreciate you
Me
sharing that. I'm kind of like you though too in that sense. I like to journal a bit, and I like pen and paper. It's just always kind of worked well for me. I use what I can digitally, as with the calendars and whatnot, but there's a real part of me that's definitely paper and pen, and it just kind of resonates. So, no, I
Yeah,
hear
it's
you there.
very analog.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it dates me, but it's just how my brain is wired at this point in my life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sometimes easier just to run with it, right, than to go retool it. So, let's pivot for a minute. So one of the things I like to talk about is just looking at your career, and it's a two-sided question, right? I think the knife cuts both ways. You got to be fair. But can you share with us, maybe a big hit you took in your career at some point where, things didn't go as planned, but you walked away with something that you felt like was just an absolute nugget. And then at the same time, maybe share something that went really well, maybe a big win, and sort of the gratitude that you got from it. I'm always kind of curious. I think a lot can be learned from others, their wins and their losses.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I probably one of my biggest hits, if you will, that I've taken in my own career was, and this really sticks with me today. The venture fund that I was working for right out of grad school was struggling a bit during its first year, and I ended up not having a job at the end of the first year because we just didn't have enough resources to cover having non-partners on the team at that point in time. And I had to go do a deep soul search on how I was going to continue to navigate my career and progress in the way I wanted to progress. And I realized at that point too that some things are just outside of your control, and just like what's going on in the world around us today, there's things that are outside of your control, and you just have to roll with it, be resilient, do your best, try and find something that you find that you can find some value in what's next, and learn from the experience, and think about how you can continue to navigate your own career in a way that you'll find satisfying. So, after I left the venture fund, I took a job at an investment bank for about a year before my wife and I decided to move up to the Bay Area. And, it was a bit of a detour for me. I was doing, interesting work. It didn't hurt my career at all. I got some great experience in it. I felt like it was a detour at the time, but in retrospect, it actually probably helped me later because I really improved my financial skills. I improved my analytical skills. I got skills out of it that have benefited me since then. So It may have not felt like what I wanted to be doing at the time, but I'm glad I did it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So that's kind of a hit that I took early in my career, and how it impacted my career is I don't think it had a negative impact in the long run.
I like how, some people, some people be like, well, there's a silver lining and whatnot, right? And I think it's true. I think there's always a silver lining in the ups and the downs, and what appears to be a big hit or a big setback, oftentimes it seems like, right, once we get a little older and get a little more gray, we can look back and say, you know what, that was awesome. I mean, I'm glad that happened. To your point, I could see those traits in my own life where, had I not gone off and done that, I wouldn't be sitting here today doing some of the things that I can do today. It just is simply, it would not be possible.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, my passion is in working in clean energy and energy system decarbonization. And I don't think I ever would have really been able to get into that if I hadn't had to transition when I transitioned. Right. I ended up being in the right place at the right time, and being able to pivot into renewable energy at a time when, frankly, there weren't a lot of experts in renewable energy. So my skills that I developed previously ended up being the closest fit that my new firm could find to what we needed to build a renewable energy team. So ended up actually being very fortuitous in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I think you just can't always see those things when you're in the moment. You think that these transitions are without a lot of um, design behind them. But, it's only with hindsight sometimes that you can see, well, actually that worked out pretty well. And I did gain from that, net.
Right. Well, and I think it gets back to what we talked about earlier. It's that meandering journey. I think it's recognizing the fact that if you're working hard, you're applying yourself, there's value in every step. Sometimes you don't see the dots. Looking back, it's 2020 oftentimes, but no, I like where you went with that. And again, I think it's a great reminder to anybody listening to this podcast. I mean, that rings true, I think, for everybody all the time. And it's good to keep in mind, because we know when we feel ourselves outside of where we should be, it's always tough, right? We can be our own worst critics. We can beat ourselves up and we're wasting time. I'm spinning wheels, whatever you want to call it. But, maybe take that step back and say, wait a second, there could be some good stuff here. If I just apply myself, keep my head down, things will come full circle. So I appreciate you sharing that. That kind of takes me to another place too. What's your best piece of advice? What's the best piece of advice you ever received? Personal, professional, whatever. What do you want to throw out there to us?
Always find the value in what you're doing today. Don't always be looking towards the future. Find the hidden gem in what you're working on now that makes you happy and that you're good at, and do it well. That's probably the biggest thing. And I'll give you one other little hidden gem that it's not really a hidden gem. I think this is pretty obvious to a lot of people, but find good mentors in your career. Find people that are doing something that you want to do, and find a way to go buy them coffee, go try and just converse with them and learn from them, and try and get as much experience and stories from them as you can about how they got to where they're at. Those are the types of relationships that can really help you later in your career and help you plot out your journey.
Yeah. I can't tell you, that's great advice. I kind of came into that myself, I feel like late in the game. I wish I realized earlier, my 20s per se, that's a proven strategy to help you move forward, and make kind of less mistakes, more good decisions, less bad decisions, but really kind of charting that path for you. So yeah, it's a great piece of advice. I and a lot of people overlook it. I think a lot of people think, hey, I could do it myself. It's like, well, maybe, but it might take you twice as long and be 4 times as hard, right? So maybe that's not the best way to go about it. So, well, we're kind of winding it down here. Maybe I got another one, kind of getting back to Strategen a little bit. This is a tough question, I think, in some sense. I mean, before the virus, I think it would have been easier to address, but the fact that we have the uncertain situation we're in, it is what it is. But where do you see your space moving forward? Not only Strategen, but low carbon emissions. What do you see over the next 5 to 10 years for those that are watching this podcast and are asking themselves, is this a space I want to get into, or I think it's going to do this? And they kind of like to compare it against which you see, recognizing, you're in a pole position. What do you think?
That's a great question. And I think, obviously, like all industries, there will be an impact on the energy sector due to COVID. I think in the long term, and even in the medium term, though, the transition in the energy ecosystem right now from these conventional, carbon-based technologies to zero carbon technologies, solar, wind, energy storage, batteries on the grid, electric vehicles, green hydrogen is another one that's really coming into the forefront of the conversation right now. The economics have shifted fundamentally there, and the transition is going to continue happening at a very, very rapid pace, regardless of the macroeconomic situation that's happening in the world around us. Okay. We're just too far along in the transition for it to stop at this point. So I see plenty of opportunity within the energy industry for careers in clean tech and all these new technologies. Just like how so many other industries have been disrupted by new technology over the past 20, 30 years, that transition is in full swing right now in the energy system. I think the energy system was lagging many other sectors up until probably the past 5 to 10 years. And the time for that transition is now.
Okay.
So, and honestly, as far as Strategen goes, very micro now. We haven't really seen a lot of impact to our own business as a result of COVID. There's some changes to the types of projects we're working on. The biggest change is honestly just into our working environment. Moving to a more virtual working environment has been the biggest adaptation that we've all been going through. Now, fortunately, what we're doing is very conducive for that virtual working environment. So we've been able to move into that pretty seamlessly. But there's not really an opportunity for the direct person-to-person collaboration, at least at the moment. And that'll come back. But I think that the mindset shift has already taken place, where a lot of us have now kind of come to the conclusion we don't actually need to have a physical office anymore. It just doesn't really provide great enough value for it to be a necessity.
Right. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, it's always one of those, you somewhat of a prediction, somewhat of, reality sort of, you kind of blend the two, but it's good to hear. I mean, the kind of the momentum is there, moving towards, the low carbon emission. I mean, there's projects in place. I from what I've seen in the last, 15, 20 years in the space, I mean, it's headed in that direction. There's money there. It's being spent. The cost to do the projects is real and recoverable. The ROIs are there. So it's good to hear. I appreciate, kind of weighing in on that a little bit, because again, there's so much uncertainty out there. It's good to get a little clarity as it relates to, to all these markets. One thing I always like to do at the end of every show is, how do people get in touch with you? If someone's watching this podcast and they've been inspired by the things that you have to say, and they're, hey, look, I might want to talk to Mark about mentorship, or, they see a need for, Strategen to come in and offer some consultative guidance moving forward. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not that hard to find, actually. If you go to www.strategen.com and then click down through the team, you'll be able to find me, and you'll be able to find my contact info, my email, my phone number, all of that good stuff. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. I think I'm just /M Higgins, something like that, and send me a LinkedIn request. Happy to chat. And, for those of you who are young and looking for the next step in your career, it doesn't have to be young. I shouldn't say that. That's not correct for me to say that in these days. But anybody who's looking for the next step in their career too, in the energy space, you got skills and you're interested in working on transformational energy issues. Look us up and look at our career page. We got a lot of job openings right now with the firm. A lot of exciting opportunities. So give us a holler and let us know.
All right, I appreciate you sharing that, Mark. And I can honestly say, having known Mark for a while now, he's an easy guy to talk to, very responsive. So if you reach out, you got any questions, don't be afraid. Mark's a good guy. You'd be surprised how much value and time he will give you, recognizing he's busy, he's got a lot on his plate, but he always finds time to give back. So you're take him up on it if you think there's something here with Mark. I want to thank you for making time to be with us today. I've been wanting to do this podcast for a while with you. It was a lot of fun, and I think you threw out a lot of great stuff. I mean, industry specific, but also just kind of getting back to the first thing you talked about. Enjoy the journey. It can take you on some great places. You'd be surprised sometimes where you end up and what those detours really did to kind of propel you forward. So I think you did a great job, laying it out there, for a lot of people to take in and to use, moving forward. So I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's been a real pleasure. So much fun talking with you today, and really excited about your podcast. And I'm gonna be one of your big fans, listening in all the time.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. And hey, to everybody watching this podcast, if you want to spend some time in the hot seat like Mark, you can reach out to us at intergeniuspodcast.com. You can fill out the intake form, and we will get in touch with you. And as always, remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question really is this: what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.